Atlantics. So I would therefore like to, again, just go over what I think would have been the 12 steps, basically, of deregulation that could and should have been avoided, without which I don't believe the current financial meltdown could have taken place, and the economic devastation, of course, would not therefore have followed. Those 12 steps are, very briefly, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and the consequent rising of the culture of recklessness, the hiding of liabilities or off-balance sheet accounting, the rejection by the executive branch of the financial derivative regulation, and the same rejection by Congress, the SEC's voluntary regulation regime for investment banks, the bank self-regulation panic, as it were, goes global, the failure to prevent predatory lending, federal preemption of state consumer protection laws, the accountability escape, or the assignee liability, the entry into the subprime market of Fannie and Freddie, the merger mania and the rampant conflicts of interest, the failure of the credit ratings firms. I'd like to talk just very briefly about each of those. And out of those 12, each of you will sort of cull several of them, and it gives you something to talk about, so that when people say to you, what on earth was it that happened? I mean, how could this have happened in the way it did? You will be equipped with some answers. You're very welcome to, write down these various different 12 headings, if you like. Basically, it's worthwhile committing this stuff to memory, because it alleviates the kind of inevitability that you feel when you ask yourself why all this really had to happen, which of course it didn't. It truly didn't have to happen. And the ogres, the criminals that allowed it to happen, really should be, at the very least, publicly displayed for all to see. That the idea that Greenspan gets away with it is simply intolerable to me. Worse than the fact that he did it in the first place is the way in which society simply allows him, to get off the hook, as it did in the 30s. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, quite by coincidence, when I was talking about the Pecora hearings of the 1930s, which led to all the regulation that we have come to know and love, and the creation of the SEC, etc., quite by coincidence, this has come up over the weekend, and it was the subject of a discussion on the Bill Moyers show, either on Friday, I think it is. We tend to hear it over TiVo, so I can never remember which day these things come out. But I think it was on Friday. They talked about the Pecora hearings, and somebody has just written a book about those hearings, and we're allowed to hear the views and opinions of experts in the matter, just one day after I had spoken about this. So believe me, this is not me keying off anybody else. It must be somebody listening to the Richard Martin wake-up call. Well, good for them. Anyway, back to the 12 deregulatory steps to the financial meltdown. All right, well, now the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act was done in 1999, and basically what it did, the Act had prohibited commercial banks from offering investment banking and insurance services. And incredibly enough, in a form of sort of corporate civil disobedience, Citibank and insurance giant Travelers Group merged in 1998, which was a move that was illegal at the time, but for which they were given a 2-year forbearance on the assumption that they would be able to force a change in the relevant law at a future date, which they did. And the 1999 repeal of Glass-Steagall helped create the conditions in which banks invested monies from checking and savings account into the creative financial instruments such as mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps, investment gambles that, of course, have rocked the financial markets in 2008. Well, the second element here was hiding liabilities or off-balance sheet accounting. And as you all know probably, holding assets off the balance sheet generally allows companies to exclude toxic or money-losing assets from financial disclosures to investors in order to make the company appear more valuable than it is. And banks used these off-balance sheet operations, special purpose entities as they were called, SPEs, or special purpose vehicles, SPVs, to hold securitized mortgages. And because the securitized mortgages were held by an off-balance sheet entity, however, the banks didn't have to hold capital reserves as against the risk of default, thus leaving them so vulnerable. Very important to understand this. And still, off-balance sheet operations are permitted by Financial Accounting Standards Board rules installed at the urging of the big banks. Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association and the American Securitization Forum are among the lobby interests now blocking efforts to get this rule reformed. And then we have the third element, the executive branch rejecting financial derivative regulation. And financial derivatives still to this day are unregulated. And by all accounts, this has been a disaster. Warren Buffett himself warned that they represented weapons of mass financial destruction, and that has proved prescient. Financial derivatives have amplified the financial crisis far beyond the unavoidable troubles connected to the popping of the housing bubble. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, has jurisdiction over futures, options, and other derivatives connected to commodities. During the Clinton administration, the CFTC sought to exert its regulatory control over financial derivatives. The agency was quashed by opposition from Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin and, above all, Fed Chair Alan Greenspan. They challenged the agency's jurisdictional authority and insisted that CFTC regulation might imperil existing financial activity that was already at considerable scale, though of course nowhere near the present levels. Then Deputy Secretary Treasury Lawrence Summers, we all know who he is, he told Congress that CFTC proposals, and I quote, cast a shadow of regulatory uncertainty over an otherwise thriving market. Then the fourth element, Congress itself blocking financial derivative regulation. The deregulation or non-regulation of financial derivatives was sealed in 2000 with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act passage, of which was engineered by then-Senator Phil Gramm. Oh yeah, he was the one that said that Americans were whiners because of the recession, that they couldn't afford this and that, and they were basically, presumably going out of work because they couldn't be bothered to do the job. Who knows? That put him out of business quick sharp. Then the fifth element, the SEC's voluntary regulation regime for investment banks. In 1975, the SEC's Trading and Markets Division promulgated a rule requiring investment banks to maintain a debt-to-net capital ratio of less than 12 to 1. It forbade trading in securities if the ratio reached or exceeded 12 to 1, so most companies maintained a ratio far below it.